sometimes the most dangerous truth is the one that saves your life. In the grand marble corridors of the royal palace, where whispers carry more weight than gold and silence can mean the difference between life and death, one man's refusal to speak became the very thing that would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a loyal royal guard whose unwavering silence in the face of false accusations would ultimately unravel a web of corruption, betrayal, and murder that had been carefully woven for decades. What started as a routine security assignment on a cold December evening would transform into a fight for survival, justice, and the very soul of a kingdom. The truth, as they say, has a way of surfacing, but sometimes it takes extraordinary courage and the right people in the right place at the right time to bring it to light. The December wind howled through the ancient stone corridors of Aldermere Palace, carrying with it the scent of pine from the royal gardens and the distant sound of Christmas preparations echoing from the servants' quarters. Marcus Chen adjusted his ceremonial sword belt and checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him that punctuality was not just expected but demanded, especially during the holiday season when security protocols tightened like a noose around the palace grounds. At 38, Marcus had earned his place among the elite royal guard through dedication, skill, and an unwavering sense of duty that impressed even the most seasoned veterans. His colleagues respected him, his superiors trusted him, and the royal family themselves had come to recognize his quiet competence. Tonight, he had been assigned to the East Wing, a section of the palace that housed the private offices of several high-ranking government officials who maintained quarters within the royal residence. The East Wing had always been considered one of the more peaceful assignments. Unlike the main palace where tourists, dignitaries, and media personnel created a constant buzz of activity, the East Wing operated in hushed efficiency. Ministers, advisors, and senior civil servants moved through its corridors with the purposeful stride of people who shaped the destiny of nations behind closed doors. It was here that policies were crafted, international agreements were negotiated, and the real business of government took place away from the prying eyes of the public. Marcus began his evening patrol at precisely 6 o'clock, his polished boots echoing softly against the marble floors. The hallways were dimly lit, creating long shadows that danced with his movements. Oil paintings of long-dead monarchs gazed down from gilded frames, their stern expressions seeming to follow him as he made his rounds. The East Wing contained 12 offices, 2 conference rooms, a small library, and a secure communications center. Each required a specific security check, and Marcus performed these duties with the methodical precision that had made him a model guard. The first sign that something was amiss came at 7:15. As Marcus approached the office of Deputy Minister James Whitmore, he noticed that the usually locked door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of warm light spilled into the corridor, and he could hear the low murmur of voices from within. This was unusual. Whitmore typically left his office by 5:30, and access to the East Wing after hours required special authorization that would have been logged with security. Marcus paused outside the door, following protocol. He was trained to assess situations carefully before taking action, especially in the delicate environment of the palace where a misunderstanding could have serious diplomatic or political consequences. The voices inside were too low to understand clearly, but he could distinguish at least 2 different speakers. One voice was definitely male, deep and authoritative. The second was harder to identify but seemed to carry a tone of urgency. Following standard procedure, Marcus activated his radio to report the unauthorized access. But before he could speak, the door swung open fully, and Deputy Minister Whitmore emerged. The man looked flustered, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus had never seen before: fear. "Guard Chen," Whitmore said, his voice carefully controlled despite his obvious agitation. "I didn't realize anyone was on duty in this section tonight." Marcus straightened. "Standard evening patrol, sir. I noticed your office was occupied and wanted to ensure everything was in order." "Everything is perfectly fine," Whitmore replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I was just finishing some urgent paperwork. You know how it is during the holiday season, so many loose ends to tie up before the new year." Behind Whitmore, Marcus caught a glimpse of another figure moving in the shadows of the office. The person appeared to be gathering papers from Whitmore's desk, working with swift efficiency. Marcus couldn't make out details, but something about the scene felt wrong. The urgency, the late hour, the evident nervousness of a man who was usually the picture of calm competence, it all triggered the instincts that had kept Marcus alive during his military service before joining the Royal Guard. "Of course, sir," Marcus replied professionally. "Will you be needing an escort when you're ready to leave?" "Security regulations recommend that won't be necessary," Whitmore interrupted. "I'll be leaving shortly through the private exit. Please continue with your regular patrol." Marcus nodded and moved away from the door, but something nagged at him. In his years of service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that something was seriously wrong. The private exit Whitmore had mentioned was typically used only for highly sensitive meetings or emergency situations. It bypassed the main security checkpoints and led directly to a secluded area of the palace grounds where vehicles could enter and leave without being logged by the primary security systems. As Marcus continued his patrol, he made mental notes of everything he had observed. The time, Whitmore's appearance and behavior, the presence of another person in the office, the mention of the private exit. He had been trained to remember details, and something told him these details might prove important. 20 minutes later, as Marcus completed his circuit of the East Wing, he heard the distinctive sound of a car engine starting from the direction of the private exit. Through a window, he caught a brief glimpse of dark sedan pulling away from the palace, its headlights cutting through the December darkness. The car moved quickly, faster than was typical for vehicles leaving the royal grounds. Marcus was debating whether to report the incident when his radio crackled to life. The voice of Sergeant Morrison, the duty commander, filled the small corridor with urgency. "All units, be advised. We have a situation in the East Wing. Report to the main security office immediately." This is not a drill. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He responded immediately, confirming his location and estimated time of arrival at the security office. As he hurried through the corridors, his mind raced through the possibilities. Had someone reported his encounter with Whitmore? Was there a security breach he hadn't detected? Had something happened after the deputy minister left? The main security office was buzzing with activity when Marcus arrived. Several guards were present, along with two men in dark suits whom Marcus didn't recognize but who clearly carried authority. Inspector Davies of the Royal Protection Service was pacing behind the main desk, his face grim. "Guard Chen," Davies called out as Marcus entered. "We need to talk." The inspector gestured toward a small interview room adjacent to the main office. Marcus followed, his training keeping his expression neutral despite the growing concern in his chest. The two men in suits accompanied them, positioning themselves near the door in a way that Marcus recognized from his military experience. They were blocking any easy exit. "Marcus," Davies began, using his first name in a way that immediately put Marcus on alert. Davies was strictly formal in official situations. "We've received some very serious information tonight. Information that involves you directly." Marcus remained silent, waiting for the explanation that he sensed would change everything. 3 hours ago, we received an anonymous tip through our secure hotline. The caller claimed that a member of the Royal Guard was involved in selling classified security information to foreign agents. The caller specifically mentioned your name. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but his training kept him upright and alert. "Sir, I can assure you that," Davies held up a hand. "Let me finish." The caller provided specific details about a meeting that supposedly took place tonight in the East Wing. They claimed you had been observed passing documents to an unauthorized individual in Deputy Minister Whitmore's office. Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. The encounter with Whitmore, the mysterious figure in the office, the hurried departure, suddenly, everything took on a sinister new meaning. But not in the way Davies suggested. "Inspector," Marcus said carefully, "I did encounter Deputy Minister Whitmore in his office tonight during my routine patrol." "However, we know," one of the men in suits interrupted. "We have it all on record." The man stepped forward, producing a small digital recording device. "Your conversation with the Deputy Minister was captured by the office security system. Would you like to hear it?" Marcus nodded, though confusion was clouding his thoughts.
He hadn't said anything incriminating in his brief conversation with Whitmore.
But, as the recording played, his blood ran cold. The voice was definitely his, but the words were not. The recording captured him speaking to Whitmore, but, in this version, Marcus was discussing payment schedules, delivery methods, and asking about the buyers from the Eastern Bloc. The conversation painted a clear picture of a corrupt guard selling state secrets to foreign agents. "This recording is fabricated," Marcus said firmly.
"That is not what happened during our conversation. The technical analysis suggests otherwise," the second suit said. "Voice patterns match, stress indicators are consistent, and the recording shows no signs of digital manipulation."
Davies looked genuinely pained.
"Marcus, I've known you for 8 years.
"This is not the man I thought you were, but the evidence is false," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising slightly before he controlled himself.
"Inspector, you know me.
You know my record, my service, my dedication to the crown.
I would never betray my oath." "Then, explain how this recording exists," the first suit demanded.
"Explain why an anonymous caller had detailed information about your movements tonight. Explain why Deputy Minister Whitmore has confirmed that you approached him with an offer to sell classified information." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. Whitmore had confirmed the story. The Deputy Minister, a man Marcus had respected and trusted, was actively participating in framing him for treason. "I want to speak to my union representative," Marcus said, invoking his right to legal counsel. "I want to speak to Colonel Harrison in the Royal Guard Command. And I want a full investigation of this recording and the circumstances surrounding it."
Davies nodded sadly.
"That's your right, of course. But, pending that investigation, I have no choice but to place you under arrest."
The words every loyal soldier dreads hearing were spoken with formal precision. "Marcus Chen, you are under arrest on suspicion of treason against the crown. You have the right to remain silent."
As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus made a decision that would prove crucial in the days to come.
He would remain silent.
Not because he was guilty, but because he needed time to understand what was really happening. Someone had gone to elaborate lengths to frame him, using sophisticated technology and corrupting a high-ranking government official. This was not a simple case of a guard gone rogue, this was part of something much larger and more dangerous. Marcus Chen, loyal soldier and devoted guardian of the realm, was led away from the palace he had sworn to protect, accused of betraying everything he held dear. But, even as the security doors closed behind him, even as colleagues he had served with for years looked at him with suspicion and disappointment, Marcus held on to one unshakable truth: he was innocent. The question that would haunt him in the hours and days to come was not whether he could prove his innocence, but whether he would live long enough to try. Because if someone could engineer such an elaborate frame-up, if they could corrupt a deputy minister and create such convincing false evidence, then they possessed resources and influence that reached into the very heart of the government he served. As Marcus was processed through the initial stages of arrest, his mind was already working on the puzzle.
Who would want to frame him? Why choose him specifically? What were they really trying to accomplish? And, most importantly, what had really been happening in Whitmore's office that night?
The answers to these questions lay hidden in a conspiracy that stretched back decades, involving players whose names were spoken only in the most secure rooms of government and whose influence extended far beyond the borders of their small kingdom. Marcus Chen had stumbled into the middle of a deadly game, and his silence, his refusal to speak until he understood the rules, might be the only thing keeping him alive. The holding cell in the basement of the Royal Protection Service headquarters was a far cry from the elegant corridors Marcus had patrolled just hours earlier. The concrete walls were painted an institutional green that had faded to an unpleasant gray over the years, and the single window was positioned too high to offer any view beyond a slice of gray December sky. Marcus sat on the narrow bench that served as both seat and bed, his mind racing through the events of the evening while his body remained perfectly still. Silence had become his weapon of choice, though it was costing him dearly. Every hour that passed without a full explanation made him appear more guilty in the eyes of his captors. His union representative, a competent but overwhelmed man named Peter Hawthorne, had arrived 2 hours after the arrest and spent 30 minutes explaining the gravity of the situation. The charges against Marcus weren't just serious, they were the kind that ended careers, destroyed families, and, in extreme cases, carried sentences of life imprisonment. The evidence against you is substantial, Hawthorne had explained, spreading files across the small table in the interview room.
The recording, Whitmore's testimony, financial records showing unexplained deposits into an account bearing your name, Marcus. They've built what appears to be an airtight case. Financial records?
Marcus had asked, speaking for the first time since his arrest beyond requesting legal representation.
3 deposits over the past 6 months. Each for £15,000, traced to a bank in Switzerland.
The account was opened using your passport number and contains your forged signature.
Marcus absorbed this information in silence.
The conspiracy against him was even more elaborate than he had initially realized. Someone had been planning this for months, carefully laying the groundwork for his downfall.
But why? And why now? I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight, Hawthorne continued.
Every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem.
Right now, silence is not your friend. But Marcus knew better.
In his military training, he had learned that sometimes silence was the only advantage you had when facing a superior enemy. Speak too soon, reveal too much, and you handed your opponents the very weapons they needed to destroy you completely. Whoever had orchestrated this frame-up possessed resources and intelligence capabilities that suggested connections at the highest levels of government. Until Marcus understood the true scope of the conspiracy, any information he revealed could be used to further incriminate him or, worse, to eliminate him entirely.
I want to speak to Colonel Harrison, Marcus said finally.
And I want a complete technical analysis of that recording done by an independent expert, not someone connected to the Royal Protection Service. Hawthorne nodded, making notes on his legal pad. I can arrange both, but, Marcus, you need to understand the political pressure surrounding this case. The story has already leaked to the press. The headlines tomorrow will be devastating. Royal Guard arrested for treason, palace security compromised, Christmas terror at the palace. The longer you remain silent, the more the public narrative solidifies against you. What Hawthorne didn't know, what Marcus couldn't yet tell him, was that the press leak was almost certainly part of the plan. By making the charges public quickly, the real conspirators were ensuring that any investigation would be conducted under intense media scrutiny. It would be harder for Marcus to receive a fair hearing when the entire nation was watching and demanding quick justice.
Colonel Harrison arrived at the facility just after midnight.
Marcus heard his distinctive voice echoing through the corridors long before the cell door opened. Harrison was old-school military, a man who had earned his rank through decades of service in some of the world's most dangerous places.
He had recruited Marcus personally 8 years earlier, recognizing qualities that other commanders had missed. 5 minutes, Harrison told the guard as he entered the cell. And I want privacy.
When they were alone, Harrison studied Marcus with the careful assessment of a commander evaluating a soldier's readiness for battle.
This is a mess, son. A real bloody mess.
Marcus remained seated but straightened his posture out of respect for his superior officer.
Sir, I don't.
Harrison held up a weathered hand.
Don't say anything yet. First, listen.
The colonel moved to the window, his back to Marcus as he spoke in low tones.
I've been making inquiries since I heard about your arrest.
Unofficial inquiries through channels that most people don't know exist. What I've learned is that this case has been declared a matter of national security.
That means it's been taken out of normal investigative channels and placed under the direct supervision of the Cabinet Security Committee. Marcus felt his stomach tighten.
The Cabinet Security Committee was composed of the most senior government officials, including the Prime Minister, the heads of intelligence services, and key ministers. For a case to reach that level suggested implications far beyond a single corrupt guard. The recording you supposedly made with Whitmore has been analyzed by 3 different technical experts.
All 3 confirm its authenticity. The financial evidence appears solid.
Your access codes were used to enter restricted database systems on 4 occasions over the past 2 months. Harrison turned to face Marcus directly.
On paper, you look guilty as hell. But You don't believe I am, Marcus said quietly. No, I don't. I've watched you for 8 years, Marcus.
I've seen you in situations where lesser men would have compromised their principles for money or safety or simple convenience.
You're not a traitor.
Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully.
But someone very powerful wants the world to believe you are. The question is why?
This was the opening Marcus had been waiting for, the first indication that someone in authority was thinking beyond the surface evidence. Colonel, I need you to investigate Deputy Minister Whitmore's activities over the past 6 months.
His financial records, his communications, his travel.
And I need you to look into what projects or policies he's been working on that might make him valuable to foreign interests.
Harrison nodded slowly. You think Whitmore is the real target? That you're just collateral damage?
I think I stumbled into something much bigger than anyone realizes.
The person in Whitmore's office tonight wasn't there to receive information from me.
They were there to receive information from him. I was supposed to be the cover story, the explanation for why unauthorized individuals had access to classified material. That's a serious accusation, Marcus.
Whitmore has been with the government for 15 years. His security clearance is top level.
He has access to some of the most sensitive information in the kingdom. Which would make him extremely valuable to the right buyers, Marcus replied. Colonel, someone invested months of planning and significant resources to frame me for this. They created false financial records, forged bank accounts, manufactured audio evidence, and corrupted a high-ranking official.
That's not the work of a casual opportunist. That's the work of a professional intelligence operation.
Harrison was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of Marcus's theory. If the guard was right, then they were dealing with a sophisticated espionage network that had penetrated the highest levels of government. The arrest of Marcus Chen wasn't the end of a security breach, it was the beginning of a cover-up designed to hide a much larger threat.
There's something else you need to know, Harrison said finally.
2 hours ago, Deputy Minister Whitmore was found dead in his home.
Apparent suicide.
He left a note confessing to selling state secrets and expressing remorse for allowing you to become involved in his activities.
The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. Whitmore's death changed everything.
With the deputy minister dead, there would be no opportunity to question him, no chance to uncover the truth about what had really happened in his office. The note Harrison described would serve to cement Marcus's guilt in the public mind while conveniently eliminating the one person who could have provided evidence of the real conspiracy. The note is being analyzed for authenticity, but preliminary reports suggest it's genuine. Handwriting matches, fingerprints are clean, no signs of coercion. Harrison's voice carried a tone of professional skepticism.
Very convenient timing. Too convenient, Marcus agreed.
Colonel, I need you to arrange something for me.
I need to speak to someone from outside the normal government channels. Someone who can investigate this independently. What did you have in mind?
Marcus had been thinking about this since his arrest, considering who might have both the skills and the motivation to uncover the truth. There's a journalist named Sarah Mitchell who works for the Independent Guardian. She's covered intelligence and security issues for the past decade. More importantly, she's known for her investigative work on government corruption.
If anyone can dig deep enough to find the real story, it's her.
Harrison looked skeptical. Marcus, involving the press at this stage could make things much worse for you.
Once journalists start digging, there's no controlling what they might uncover or how they might present it. Right now, the official narrative is that I'm a traitor who corrupted an honest government minister. Whitmore's death has sealed that story.
The only way to change the narrative is to find evidence that contradicts it, and the only people with the freedom to conduct that kind of investigation are journalists.
And what makes you think this Sarah Mitchell will believe your story over the official version?
Marcus managed a slight smile, the first expression of hope he had felt since his arrest. Because 6 months ago, she published an article about irregularities in government contractor payments. One of the companies she investigated was Meridian Security Solutions, a private intelligence firm with connections to several former senior officials. I remember reading the article because it mentioned questionable payments made to shell companies in Switzerland.
Harrison's expression sharpened. The same Switzerland where your alleged payments originated? The same. Colonel, I think Meridian Security Solutions is the link between everything that's happened.
If Sarah Mitchell was already investigating them, she might be the one person who can see the bigger picture. The colonel stood and paced the small cell, his military bearing evident even in the confined space. This is dangerous territory, Marcus. If you're right about a larger conspiracy, then, the people responsible have already demonstrated they're willing to commit murder to protect their secrets.
Involving a journalist puts her at risk as well.
And, leaving things as they are guarantees that whoever killed Whitmore will get away with it while I spend the rest of my life in prison for crimes I didn't commit. Harrison stopped pacing and looked directly at Marcus. If I arrange for you to speak with this journalist, if I help you pursue this investigation, I'm putting my own career on the line. If you're wrong, if the evidence really does prove your guilt, I'll be finished. Marcus met his superior's gaze without flinching.
Colonel, you recruited me because you saw something in me that you trusted. I'm asking you to trust that judgment now. After what felt like an eternity, Harrison nodded. I'll see what I can do.
But, Marcus, if we're going to challenge this officially sanctioned version of events, we need to be very careful about how we proceed. The people we're potentially dealing with have already shown they can manipulate evidence, corrupt officials, and eliminate threats.
They won't hesitate to destroy anyone who gets in their way.
As Harrison prepared to leave, Marcus called out softly, Colonel, there's one more thing. When you investigate Whitmore's recent activities, pay particular attention to any meetings or communications involving Eastern European contacts. In the fabricated recording, my voice mentioned buyers from the Eastern Bloc.
That detail wasn't random, it was meant to point investigators in a specific direction. You think Whitmore was really selling information to Eastern European intelligence services? I think someone wanted us to believe he was.
The question is whether they were trying to cover up the real buyers or create a diversion from something even more sensitive.
Harrison nodded grimly and left the cell.
Marcus was alone again with his thoughts and his growing understanding of the dangerous game he had been thrust into. Somewhere in the darkness outside his cell, the real conspirators were congratulating themselves on a successful operation. Whitmore was dead, Marcus was discredited and imprisoned, and any investigation would likely focus on the manufactured evidence that pointed to a straightforward case of corruption and treason. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated Marcus Chen's ability to see beyond the surface narrative, to recognize the careful construction of their frame-up, and to maintain his silence until he could strike back with the truth. The silence they expected from a defeated prisoner was actually the calculated patience of a soldier preparing for battle. In the hours that followed Harrison's departure, Marcus used his solitude to reconstruct every detail of the evening's events, every conversation, every observation that might provide a clue to the real conspiracy. He thought about Whitmore's behavior, the shadowy figure in the office, the timing of his arrest, and the convenient appearance of evidence that supported the charges against him. Somewhere in those details lay the key to unraveling the truth. Marcus Chen, loyal guardian of the realm, was about to become something his enemies hadn't anticipated, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sarah Mitchell had covered enough government scandals to recognize when a story was too neat, too convenient, too perfectly packaged for public consumption. The arrest of Royal Guard Marcus Chen for treason had all the hallmarks of a story designed to end questions rather than answer them. When her phone rang at 2 a.m. with a call from someone claiming to be Colonel Harrison of the Royal Guard, her journalistic instincts immediately went on high alert. Ms. Mitchell, I apologize for the late hour, but I believe you may be interested in investigating a story that connects to your previous work on government contractors. Sarah was already reaching for her notebook and digital recorder. Calls like this, especially at this hour, usually meant someone was desperate enough to risk their career to get information out.
I'm listening.
I can't discuss details over the phone, but I can tell you that the arrest of Guard Chen may be connected to the same financial irregularities you investigated in your article about Meridian Security Solutions.
Would you be willing to meet to discuss this further?
20 minutes later, Sarah was dressed and, driving through the empty streets toward the location Harrison had specified, a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city that was far from government buildings and media offices. She had covered enough sensitive stories to recognize the importance of meeting sources in neutral territory, away from surveillance systems and curious observers. Colonel Harrison was exactly what she had expected from his voice, ramrod straight posture, weathered face, and eyes that missed nothing. He was sitting in a corner booth with clear sight lines to both entrances, a habit that Sarah recognized from other military sources she had worked with over the years.
Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming.
I want to be clear from the outset that I'm speaking to you in an unofficial capacity. Nothing I tell you tonight can be attributed to me or to the Royal Guard command structure. Sarah nodded, understanding the delicate nature of the conversation.
Off the record until you tell me otherwise. What's the connection between Marcus Chen and Meridian Security Solutions?
Harrison slid a thin manila folder across the table. 6 months ago, you published an article documenting suspicious payments from government accounts to Swiss bank accounts controlled by shell companies. One of those companies was traced to Meridian Security Solutions. The payments totaled approximately £200,000 over an 8-month period.
I remember the article. The government claimed the payments were for legitimate consulting services, though they couldn't provide detailed documentation of what services were actually performed.
The account that received those payments, Harrison continued, was opened using the same Swiss bank that now shows deposits allegedly made to Marcus Chen.
The account numbers are sequential, suggesting they were opened at approximately the same time.
Sarah felt the familiar excitement of a story beginning to take shape.
You're suggesting that Chen's account was opened as part of the same operation that involved Meridian Security Solutions?
I'm suggesting that someone with intimate knowledge of the previous financial arrangement used that information to construct a false trail of evidence against Guard Chen.
The question is why?
Harrison proceeded to outline the events of the previous evening, from Marcus's patrol of the East Wing to his arrest on charges of treason. He described the fabricated audio recording, the convenient appearance of financial evidence, and Deputy Minister Whitmore's suspicious death. With each detail, Sarah's conviction grew that she was looking at a sophisticated intelligence operation, not the simple case of corruption the government was presenting to the public.
What was Whitmore working on that would make him valuable to foreign intelligence services?
Sarah asked, her pen moving rapidly across her notebook. That's where your investigative skills are needed, Harrison replied.
Officially, Whitmore oversaw trade relations with Eastern European countries.
Unofficially, he had access to intelligence briefings, military procurement decisions, and diplomatic communications. In the wrong hands, that information could be extremely valuable. Sarah leaned back in her booth, processing the implications. If Whitmore was really selling information, and if Chen stumbled onto a meeting between Whitmore and his handlers, then framing Chen for treason would serve multiple purposes. It would discredit the one witness to Whitmore's activities, provide a cover story for any security breaches, and focus public attention on individual corruption rather than systematic intelligence penetration.
Exactly. And, with Whitmore conveniently dead, there's no one left to contradict the official narrative. Except Chen himself. Has he told you what really happened? Harrison's expression grew grim. Chen has remained largely silent since his arrest.
He's spoken only to request legal representation and to ask for specific investigations. He claims the audio recording is fabricated and that he witnessed Whitmore meeting with unknown individuals in his office.
Sarah understood the strategy behind Chen's silence.
In investigative work, sometimes the best approach was to say nothing until you had gathered enough information to tell the complete story. Speaking too early, revealing too much, could give your opponents the opportunity to counter your narrative before you had built a solid foundation for it. I want to interview Chen personally, Sarah said. And I want access to the original audio recording and the technical analysis reports.
If the recording was fabricated, there should be traces of digital manipulation that forensic experts can identify.
I can arrange for you to speak with Chen, but getting access to the technical evidence will be more difficult. The case has been classified as a national security matter, which limits the documentation available to defense attorneys, let alone journalists.
Then, we'll have to find another way to verify the audio evidence.
I have contacts in the digital forensics community who might be able to analyze the recording if we can obtain a copy.
Harrison nodded approvingly. There's something else you should know.
In my preliminary investigations into Whitmore's activities, I discovered that he had been in regular communication with individuals associated with Eastern European business interests. But, the communications weren't consistent with legitimate trade discussions. The timing, frequency, and locations of meetings suggest something much more sensitive. Sarah made detailed notes, already beginning to construct a timeline of events and identify sources who might be able to provide additional information.
Colonel, what's your assessment of the political implications if we can prove that Chen was framed?
We're talking about evidence that a government minister was compromised, that foreign intelligence services had penetrated high levels of government, and that officials were willing to destroy an innocent man to cover up their own failures.
The implications go beyond politics, Harrison replied gravely.
If foreign intelligence services had access to Whitmore's level of classified information for an extended period, they could have compromised ongoing operations, diplomatic negotiations, and military planning.
The damage to national security could be substantial.
The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Harrison's phone buzzing with an urgent message.
He read it quickly, his expression darkening. We have a problem.
Chen's legal representative, Peter Hawthorne, was found dead in his home 2 hours ago. Apparent heart attack, though he was only 45 and had no history of cardiac problems.
Sarah felt ice form in her stomach.
2 convenient deaths in less than 24 hours stretched credibility beyond any reasonable limit.
Someone is eliminating everyone connected to this case.
Chen is now completely isolated, no legal representation, no one to advocate for him, no one with access to the evidence who might question the official narrative. Which means, Harrison said grimly, that we may be the only people in a position to uncover the truth before it's buried permanently. Sarah gathered her notes and checked her recorder to ensure everything had been properly captured.
Colonel, I need to ask you directly, why are you taking this risk?
If we're right about the scope of this conspiracy, helping me investigate could end your career or worse.
Harrison was quiet for a moment, staring out the diner window at the empty parking lot.
When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of military service and the conviction of a man who had seen too much to be easily intimidated. 20 years ago, I served in a peacekeeping mission where intelligence failures led to the deaths of good soldiers. Men and women who trusted their commanders, who followed orders, who believed they were serving something larger than themselves. Those deaths could have been prevented if someone had been willing to question the official narrative, to dig deeper when things didn't add up. He turned to look directly at Sarah.
Marcus Chen is a good soldier.
He deserves better than to be sacrificed to protect the careers of officials who failed in their duty to protect national security.
Sarah understood. This wasn't just about proving Chen's innocence, it was about preventing a cover-up that could leave genuine security vulnerabilities unaddressed while innocent people paid the price for others' failures.
I'll need 48 hours to begin developing sources and gathering background information, Sarah said.
Can you arrange for me to interview Chen within that time frame? I'll make the arrangements.
But, Sarah, Harrison's use of her first name emphasized the seriousness of his warning. If we're right about this conspiracy, then, the people responsible have already demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect their secrets. You need to take precautions, vary your routines, inform trusted colleagues about your investigation, make sure someone knows where you are at all times. As Sarah drove home through the early morning darkness, her mind was already working through the investigative strategy she would need to employ. She would start with a deeper dive into Meridian Security Solutions and their connections to government officials.
She would examine Whitmore's financial records, travel patterns, and communication history.
She would seek out sources within the intelligence community who might be able to provide insight into Eastern European intelligence operations in the kingdom. Most importantly, she would interview Marcus Chen and assess whether his story held up under detailed questioning. If Chen was truly innocent, if he had really stumbled into a sophisticated intelligence operation, then his observations from that night might provide crucial clues to unraveling the entire conspiracy. But Sarah was also acutely aware of the dangers she was facing. 2 people connected to this case were already dead, and the evidence suggested that powerful individuals with substantial resources were working to suppress the truth. As an investigative journalist, she had faced threats before, but never from adversaries with the capability to eliminate witnesses and manufacture evidence with such sophisticated precision. The story was bigger than she had initially realized. This wasn't just about corruption or even espionage, it was about the integrity of the entire government security apparatus. If foreign intelligence services had successfully penetrated high levels of government, if they could corrupt officials and eliminate threats with impunity, then the very foundations of national security were at risk. As Sarah began planning her investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was racing against time. Every hour that passed gave the real conspirators more opportunity to cover their tracks, eliminate additional witnesses, and solidify the false narrative that would destroy Marcus Chen's life. The guard's silence, which had initially seemed like an obstacle to uncovering the truth, was beginning to look like the only thing that had kept him alive long enough for someone to notice the inconsistencies in the official story. Tomorrow would bring the first real test of whether the truth could overcome a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Sarah Mitchell, investigative journalist and seeker of truth, was about to begin the most dangerous investigation of her career. The interview room at the Royal Protection Service facility felt different when Sarah Mitchell entered it 48 hours later. The same institutional green walls, the same uncomfortable chairs, but now the space seemed charged with possibility rather than despair. Marcus Chen sat across from her, still wearing the plain gray clothes of a detained suspect, but his eyes held an alertness that spoke of a man ready to fight for his life. Sarah had spent those 48 hours methodically building the foundation for what she hoped would be the most important story of her career. Her investigation into Meridian Security Solutions had revealed a web of connections that stretched far beyond simple government contracting. The company maintained offices in 3 Eastern European capitals, employed former intelligence officers from at least 6 different countries, and had been linked to information brokering operations across the continent. More significantly, Sarah had discovered that Meridian's parent company was controlled by a holding firm registered in Cyprus, which in turn was owned by a network of shell companies that ultimately traced back to individuals with known connections to foreign intelligence services. The financial architecture was sophisticated, designed to obscure the true ownership and control of the organization while providing plausible cover for its activities. Guard Chen, Sarah began, activating her digital recorder with his permission. I want you to walk me through exactly what you observed in Deputy Minister Whitmore's office. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Marcus had been thinking about this moment for days, preparing to tell his story to someone who might actually listen without the filter of political considerations or predetermined conclusions. His voice was steady as he described his evening patrol, the unusual circumstances of finding Whitmore's office occupied, and the brief conversation that had ultimately led to his arrest. The person in the office with Whitmore, Marcus continued, was gathering documents from his desk. They were working quickly, efficiently, like someone familiar with the office layout and filing system. This wasn't a casual visitor, this was someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Sarah made detailed notes, paying particular attention to the timeline and the specific behaviors Marcus had observed. Did you get any sense of the relationship between Whitmore and this other person? Were they equals, or was one clearly in control of the situation? Whitmore was nervous as deferential. The body language suggested he was following instructions rather than giving them. He kept checking his watch, kept looking toward the door. The other person seemed calm, professional, like they were conducting routine business. And, when Whitmore mentioned the private exit, did that seem spontaneous or planned? Marcus considered the question carefully. Planned. He mentioned it too smoothly, too quickly. Like he had been instructed to use that route if anyone questioned his presence in the office. Sarah cross-referenced this information with the building plans she had obtained through public records. The private exit Marcus described led to a service area that could be accessed by vehicles without passing through the main security checkpoints. It was the perfect route for someone who needed to enter and leave the palace grounds without creating an official record of their visit. Marcus, I've been investigating the financial evidence that's been presented against you. The Swiss bank account, the deposits, the connections to Meridian Security Solutions. What I've found suggests that this account was opened as part of a larger financial operation involving multiple shell companies and international money transfers. She slid a folder across the table containing photocopies of financial documents she had obtained through sources in the banking industry. These records show that the account allegedly belonging to you was opened using forged documents. The signature doesn't match known samples of your handwriting, and the passport number used to open the account was reported stolen 6 months ago. Marcus examined the documents, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that the fabricated evidence was finally being exposed, anger that such sophisticated resources had been deployed to destroy his life.
Someone went to extraordinary lengths to frame me. This level of planning, this attention to detail, it suggests professional intelligence operatives. Which brings us to the audio recording, Sarah continued. I've had the recording analyzed by 3 independent digital forensics experts. All 3 agree that while the voice patterns match yours, the recording shows clear signs of digital manipulation.
Specifically, individual words and phrases have been extracted from legitimate recordings of your voice and reassembled to create conversations that never actually took place. Sarah produced a second folder containing the technical analysis reports. The software used to create this fabricated recording is sophisticated, military-grade technology that's not available to casual users. We're talking about resources that would typically be available only to intelligence agencies or highly specialized private contractors. Marcus absorbed this information, feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So they had access to legitimate recordings of my voice, probably from security briefings or official communications. They used those recordings to create false evidence that would support their narrative while eliminating the real witness to Whitmore's activities.
Exactly.
And the timing of your arrest, combined with Whitmore's convenient death, suggests this entire operation was designed to close down any investigation before it could uncover the real scope of the intelligence breach. Sarah paused, studying Marcus's reactions carefully. Despite the evidence supporting his innocence, she remained a journalist, committed to verifying every claim and testing every theory.
Marcus, I need to ask you directly, is there any possibility that you were actually involved in selling information, that you're telling me a modified version of the truth to minimize your own culpability?
Marcus met her gaze without flinching.
Ms. Mitchell, I've served my country for 15 years, first in the military and, then, in the Royal Guard.
I've been deployed to war zones, I've faced enemy fire, I've been offered bribes and threatened with violence.
In all that time, I've never compromised my oath or betrayed my duty. I understand why you have to ask that question, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that I am innocent of the charges against me.
The conviction in his voice, combined with the substantial evidence of fabrication that Sarah had uncovered, convinced her that Marcus Chen was telling the truth. But proving his innocence would require more than exposing the false evidence. It would require identifying the real conspirators and understanding their ultimate objectives. I've been investigating Meridian Security Solutions extensively, Sarah said, producing a third folder thick with documents and photographs. What I've discovered is that the company has been operating in this country for 3 years, building relationships with government officials, defense contractors, and intelligence personnel.
They've positioned themselves as a legitimate consulting firm while actually serving as a front for foreign intelligence collection.
She spread out organizational charts and financial records that painted a picture of systematic intelligence penetration. Meridian has maintained contact with at least 12 current or former government officials, including 3 who have access to classified military information. They've provided consulting services to 6 different government departments, always with access to sensitive facilities and personnel. Marcus studied the documents, recognizing several names from his years of service in the palace. These people have security clearances, access to classified briefings, knowledge of diplomatic negotiations and military plans. If they were compromised, the damage to national security could be enormous.
Which is why framing you for Whitmore's activities serves multiple purposes, Sarah explained.
It provides a scapegoat for any security breaches that might be discovered, it discredits the one witness who could testify to Whitmore's real activities, and it creates a narrative that focuses on individual corruption rather than systematic penetration. The interview was interrupted by the sound of urgent voices in the corridor outside. Through the small window in the door, Sarah could see uniformed officers moving quickly, speaking into radios with obvious concern. Marcus recognized the signs of a security alert, the kind of rapid response that indicated a serious incident. Colonel Harrison appeared at the door moments later, his expression grim.
"We need to end this interview immediately. There's been an incident."
Sarah quickly gathered her documents and shut off her recorder.
"What kind of incident?"
Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, the forensic expert who conducted the independent analysis of the audio recording, was found dead in her laboratory 2 hours ago. Apparent accident, chemical exposure from improperly stored materials.
The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Dr. Thornton had been the lead expert on the team that had proven the recording was fabricated.
Her death meant that the technical evidence supporting Marcus's innocence was now in question, since the other experts on the team would likely be reluctant to proceed without their lead investigator.
"This wasn't an accident," Sarah said quietly. "Someone is systematically eliminating everyone who could provide evidence of the conspiracy." Harrison nodded gravely.
"Which means both of you are now in serious danger.
Sarah, your investigation has clearly gotten someone's attention.
The people responsible for this conspiracy know you're getting close to exposing them." Marcus stood, his military training taking over as he assessed the new threat level.
"Colonel, how many people knew about Ms. Mitchell's investigation? How many people knew she was going to interview me today?"
"Very few. I made the arrangements personally, using secure channels."
Harrison paused, realization dawning in his eyes.
"But there may be monitoring systems we don't know about, surveillance capabilities that we haven't accounted for." Sarah felt the familiar chill of genuine fear, but her journalistic instincts remained sharp. "If they're willing to kill to prevent this story from coming out, then we must be very close to uncovering something extremely damaging. The question is whether we can expose the truth before they eliminate all the witnesses and evidence." "There's something else," Harrison continued. "I've received unofficial word that the case against Marcus is being expedited. He's scheduled for transfer to a maximum security facility tomorrow morning, and the trial date has been moved up significantly.
Once he's in the federal prison system, access will be much more limited." The implications were clear.
The conspirators were accelerating their timeline, moving to lock Marcus away before any further investigation could undermine their carefully constructed narrative. Once he was isolated in federal prison, he would be vulnerable to the kind of accidents that had claimed Whitmore, Hawthorne, and Dr. Thornton.
"We have perhaps 18 hours, Sarah said, her mind racing through possibilities.
18 hours to gather enough evidence to expose this conspiracy and protect Marcus from elimination." Marcus looked at both of them, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Then, we need to stop playing defense and start taking the fight to them. Ms. Mitchell, your investigation has identified the key players in this conspiracy. Colonel Harrison, you have access to official resources and contacts within the intelligence community. Between the three of us, we have the information and capabilities needed to expose the truth. But we also need to survive long enough to tell it," Harrison added grimly.
"And, based on recent events, that's far from guaranteed."
As the three of them began planning their next moves, Marcus Chen reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. From loyal guardian of the realm to accused traitor to key witness in a conspiracy that threatened the foundations of national security. His silence, which had initially been seen as evidence of guilt, had actually been the strategy that kept him alive long enough for the truth to begin emerging. Now, with help finally arriving and the scope of the conspiracy becoming clear, Marcus Chen was ready to break his silence and fight back against the forces that had tried to destroy him.
The next 18 hours would determine whether justice would prevail or whether a sophisticated intelligence operation would succeed in burying the truth forever.
The safe house was located in an industrial district on the outskirts of the city, chosen specifically because its warehouse environment provided multiple exit routes and clear sight lines in all directions. Colonel Harrison had selected it from a list of facilities maintained by military intelligence for exactly these kinds of situations, when loyal personnel needed protection from threats that might originate within the government itself. Sarah Mitchell sat at a folding table covered with documents, photographs, and electronic devices, her laptop open as she worked feverishly to complete the story that could save Marcus Chen's life and expose one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in the kingdom's history. 18 hours had seemed like enough time when they had made their escape from the detention facility, but, with each passing hour, the window of opportunity narrowed further. Marcus paced the perimeter of the warehouse, his military training evident in the way he maintained constant awareness of their surroundings. Every few minutes, he checked the surveillance monitors that Harrison had installed, looking for any signs of discovery. The previous night had been a blur of activity as they gathered the final pieces of evidence needed to prove the conspiracy. The breakthrough had come when Sarah's contact in the banking industry provided records showing that Meridian Security Solutions had been making regular payments to a Swiss account controlled by Deputy Minister Whitmore for over 8 months. The payments weren't for legitimate consulting services, they were payment for classified information that Whitmore had been systematically stealing and selling to foreign intelligence services. "The timeline is perfect," Sarah said, looking up from her laptop screen. Whitmore's financial problems began exactly 9 months ago when his wife's medical treatment required expensive private care that wasn't covered by government insurance. That's when the first approach from Meridian would have occurred. They identified his vulnerability and exploited it. Colonel Harrison was on his third phone call of the hour, using encrypted communication systems to coordinate with trusted contacts throughout the intelligence community. The evidence they had gathered painted a picture of an intelligence operation that had compromised multiple government departments, but getting that evidence to the right people without triggering additional cover-up efforts required careful navigation of the political landscape. "General Morrison at Defense Intelligence has agreed to review our evidence," Harrison reported after ending his latest call. "He's one of the few people at that level who hasn't been compromised by political considerations. If we can get him the complete file, he has the authority to order a full investigation that bypasses the normal channels." Marcus stopped pacing and joined them at the table. "What's the status of the charges against me? Can they proceed with the transfer even if new evidence emerges?" "That's the critical issue," Harrison replied. "The transfer order was signed by someone with sufficient authority to override normal procedures. Once you're in the federal system, it becomes much harder to access you, much easier for accidents to occur. We need to prevent the transfer or ensure that the truth comes out before it happens." Sarah had been working on multiple versions of her story, crafting articles for different scenarios depending on how events unfolded. The version she was currently polishing would expose the entire conspiracy while providing enough documented evidence to force a complete investigation. But publishing the story would also put her own life at immediate risk, since the conspirators had already demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats. "I've been thinking about the endgame," Sarah said, turning her laptop so the others could see the screen. "If we release this story through normal journalistic channels, it could take days or weeks for the political process to respond. Marcus would likely be transferred before any official action could be taken. We need a more immediate solution." Marcus studied the article Sarah had written, impressed by the thoroughness of her investigation and the compelling way she had assembled the evidence. "What are you proposing?" "I have contacts at 3 major news organizations, plus relationships with investigative journalists in 4 other countries where Meridian has been operating. If we release this story simultaneously across multiple platforms, with full documentation and evidence, it becomes impossible to suppress or discredit." Harrison nodded approvingly. "Coordinated release also provides some protection for you personally. Much harder for them to eliminate multiple journalists across different countries than to silence a single reporter." The plan was ambitious but necessary. Sarah would send the complete story, along with supporting documentation, to trusted colleagues in London, Paris, Berlin, and Washington. Each would publish simultaneously, creating a media storm that would force immediate government response while making it too dangerous for the conspirators to take direct action against the journalists involved. "There's one more element we need to address," Marcus said, pointing to a section of the timeline they had constructed. "The night I was arrested, someone called in the anonymous tip that led to the investigation. That person knew exactly when to call, exactly what to report, and exactly what evidence would be found. That suggests someone inside the Royal Protection Service is part of the conspiracy."
This was the most troubling aspect of the entire operation. The fabricated evidence, the coordinated arrests, the systematic elimination of witnesses, it all required access to official systems and procedures that could only come from someone within the security apparatus itself. "I've been thinking about that," Harrison said grimly. "There are only a handful of people with the access and authority to coordinate the kind of operation we've uncovered. Most of them have been with the service for decades, with spotless records and the highest security clearances." Sarah pulled up a file on her laptop containing background information on key personnel within the Royal Protection Service. "I've been researching everyone who had knowledge of Marcus's patrol assignment that night, everyone who had access to the evidence, everyone who could have influenced the investigation. 3 names stand out as having both the access and the financial pressures that might make them vulnerable to recruitment." The list was sobering. 3 senior officials, each with distinguished careers and reputations for integrity, but all facing personal circumstances that foreign intelligence services could exploit. Financial problems, family scandals, career disappointments, the classic vulnerabilities that skilled intelligence officers use to recruit sources within target organizations. Deputy Director Ronald Matthews, Sarah read from her notes. 15 years with the service, recently passed over for promotion to director, currently facing divorce proceedings that could cost him substantial alimony payments. He had access to Marcus's duty assignments and would have known exactly when and where to position the fabricated evidence. Marcus remembered Matthews from numerous briefings and official functions. He was professional, competent, and had always seemed genuinely dedicated to the service. The idea that he might be a traitor was difficult to accept, but the evidence was compelling. "If Matthews is the inside source," Harrison said, "then he knows about this safe house, knows about our investigation, and is probably coordinating with Meridian to eliminate us before we can expose the truth." The realization sent a chill through the warehouse. They had assumed they were safe, hidden away from the conspirators while they gathered evidence and prepared their response. But if Matthews was working with the enemy, then their location was known, their activities were being monitored, and their lives were in immediate danger. How long would it take to coordinate a response team? Marcus asked, his military experience helping him assess the tactical situation they faced. "If Matthews is really working with them, he could have a team here within an hour," Harrison replied, already reaching for the encrypted communication equipment. "We need to assume we've been compromised and execute our plan immediately." Sarah's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard as she finalized the story and prepared to send it to her international network of contacts. The article was comprehensive, thoroughly documented, and devastating in its implications. When published, it would expose not only the conspiracy against Marcus Chen but also the broader intelligence operation that had penetrated multiple levels of government. "Sending now," Sarah announced, hitting the transmission key that would deliver her story to news organizations across 3 continents. "Within 2 hours, this story will be public knowledge. The conspiracy is finished." But even as she spoke, Marcus was watching the surveillance monitors with growing alarm. Vehicle headlights were approaching the warehouse from 3 different directions, moving with the coordinated precision of a professional assault team. The conspirators had found them. "Contact!" Marcus shouted, his military training taking over completely. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north, east, and south. "We have perhaps 5 minutes before they're in position." Harrison was already gathering the most critical evidence files while Sarah backed up her computer data to encrypted cloud storage systems that would preserve the information even if they didn't survive the next few hours. The truth about the conspiracy was now beyond the reach of their enemies, but their own survival was far from guaranteed. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the adjacent building," Harrison said, pointing toward the back of the warehouse. "We can reach it through the maintenance area, but we need to move now." As they gathered their essential materials and prepared to flee, Marcus took one last look at the evidence they had assembled: documents, photographs, and testimony that proved his innocence and exposed a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of government. For days, his silence had been his protection, allowing him to survive long enough for help to arrive and the truth to emerge. Now, as armed men surrounded the building where he had finally broken that silence, Marcus Chen understood that the real battle was just beginning.
The truth was out, the evidence was public, but powerful enemies were still determined to silence him permanently. Whether justice would ultimately prevail would depend on the courage of journalists like Sarah Mitchell, the loyalty of officers like Colonel Harrison, and the determination of citizens who refused to let lies triumph over truth. The warehouse door exploded inward just as they reached the service tunnel. Behind them, Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of tactical teams moving with lethal precision. But ahead lay the possibility of escape, of survival, of seeing justice finally served. As they ran through the darkness toward an uncertain future, Marcus Chen was no longer the silent guard who had been taken away in handcuffs. He was now a witness whose testimony could bring down a conspiracy, a man whose refusal to break under pressure had ultimately saved not just his own life but the integrity of the government he had sworn to protect. The truth had emerged, just as it always does when people of courage refuse to let it be buried. And, sometimes, as Marcus had learned, silence followed by the right words at the right time can be the most powerful weapon of all.